is my
You're doing the intro, John?
answer.
Oh, well, I
Really good.
Mind
Timing.
really good. Frame of mind would be my answer.
All right, we're live.
And then I do.
This is the Bevry group. We're here with Nick from Paul Vanderklay's channel again, and we already talked for what, like an hour or so, but now we're getting into it. And Ben just brought up a really good question that I didn't want to let get lost. Of like, you want to rephrase it again, Ben?
Yeah, I'll go for it. So in our last discussion that we had, which is talking with Nick about cult ethics and objective morality on the Bevry channel, you mentioned, Nick, you've been in several cults before, and then cult was kind of phrased in this really brilliant way, which was kind of a subjective truth or subjective folklore that one kind of assumes to be true, that they just kind of take for granted, and it becomes a worldview. Or it's one that they buy into. So then it was like a relationship is like a cult, or like your job is a cult. And I've explored this before with work, where I say like businesses are selling people wishes, and you join a business based on which wishes you want to propagate. It's very popular in the tech world. All the tech companies are selling wishes to people. And those wishes may not even align up with reality. And especially with politicians, people really like those wishes. So that's kind of this cult mindset. So as someone who's, been in and out of different ones, what would you suggest for getting out of one, or even recognizing that you're in one?
Yeah.
One definition I actually came across when we were talking last time that I think is useful is just that cults or cultic structures are how we manipulate our salience field, which might be a useful definition. So if you notice your salience field being artificially manipulated in any way — artificial is a really weird word to use here and not accurate — but then the basis of that is likely something cultic. You could almost view it as sublimation of natural desires. Then you'd have to get into what the heck a natural desire is. Gets nightmarish quickly. I don't think that there is...
What if you include the notion of intention from someone else? Right? Maybe it includes the component of intention. So anytime someone intends to alter the perspective of someone else to fit a certain framework, that is...
Sure. Yeah. And I would say that quality you just highlighted there is so deeply intertwined with what it means to interact with anybody, that so long as you are a person interacting with other people, then you are operating within some form of a cultic framework.
Right.
Now, there's dangers to this worldview. They're pretty obvious. Most people, will get a trigger when you say, oh, yeah, you also are in a cult. Which is that it appears at first to put everything on a purely subjective ground level. And in a sense, it does. It has an equalizing effect. Right? Because it's useful.
Systematizing.
Yeah. Well, and it's useful for people to be able to go, I'm normal, but those people are in a cult, right? It has that boundary condition effect. Yeah. And when you say, well, no, you have to look at it in a broader way, then that boundary condition erodes quite rapidly.
Yeah.
So then,
like the differences even just between cultures, like within American culture, we do certain things that seem normal to us. Whereas if we were to go into Japan, where they have their own sort of sets of rituals and parts that are all part of their normal activities, it's like either one inside the incorrect domain would trigger as being abnormal.
Or even very wrong.
Right.
Like Japan is just really restricted on public displays of affection to the point that it's even risky. Hugging your wife in public, or and kissing in public is like, oh my God, those people are insane. What are they doing? Which is to us very bizarre, right? But
yeah, what if it's an adaptive behavior for an island situation, let's say, where monogamous couples have a hard time finding each other anyways, right? What if it's something like that, and then we come in with our Western display.
Yes.
Right. And
you're actually bringing the quality that I was going to get to. So now if you accept the kind of premise that we're operating in a cultic world, you still need a deciding mechanism. And that's where I basically fall back on pragmatism. You know? And there's a redundant loop when you do this, right? Anytime you bring up pragmatism as a basis of your judgment, what you end up losing is how you're justifying your judgment in the first place. Right? That's the problem with pragmatism.
Right.
And it's present.
In order for you to even trigger, like, in order for you to measure pragmatic utility, you have to first postulate, okay, what's the thing that I'm seeking utility
that I want?
from?
Yes.
And that's just the same sort of like cultic imposition of a certain idea set. And then you can just put whatever idea set you want to put in there. And as long as it yields that result back on itself to at least a greater degree that it can survive or even
propagate.
Grow, at least to a certain degree, then that technically means that it's pragmatically successful.
Yes. So, right, great. Look at capitalism, right? It's a system that transforms its environment so powerfully that it makes it look.
Jesus. Sorry, it's my alarm. My bad.
No worries. But it makes us think that the reality that capitalism is based on is the real reality and not one that it's self-defining and then justifying itself on. And I'm not making an argument against it here. I think it's an extraordinarily valuable system. But you do have to kind of, right, getting back to the original question of like, how do you recognize you're in a cult? There is some degree of like having to pull yourself far enough away that you can see how a system is functioning within itself without having to tie it. It's so...
No, wait. This is so cool, right? Because what happens is, or the way that I see this happening is the grievances that occur within the system are like a squeeze. They're like, and the people that don't like it pop to the surface, and that's how they get the distance. And the more authoritarian it is, the harder it squeezes, and the faster people get to the edge. And then they get to the edge, and then they look back and they say, "Wow, that wasn't very fun, was it?" And that new border condition, that new border condition is your progressive left.
Yeah.
And that is actually your dynamic influx in and out, because what happens is either that new group turns back and attacks the old structure, right? And that is a very frequent phenomenon when you see people leave what they considered as cultic structures.
Yep.
Or they like leave and make their own unit, right? Which then either becomes antagonistic or hopefully in the future mutualistic, like in the case of the United States leaving Britain, right?
Yes. Well, and ideally, I think that if you are going to create any kind of worthwhile change, it will have to form a mutualistic relationship at some point. Right? For example, I do have strong criticisms of the current form of capitalism, but I don't view the answer as not capitalism. Instead, it's more like something is missing from this structure. So there's supposed to be a counterbalance to this that's absent. And because that counterbalance is absent, it's tipping off of one side of the scale. So the question then becomes, how do I destroy this system? The question becomes, what is needed to put this back in a proper position?
Yeah. Like
augment or even what's it called? Biological systems, not sympathetic. Symbiotic. Thank you.
Yeah. That's actually how I'm trying to think of the design space for new entrepreneurial ideas, because we do live in a hyper competitive mode in many cases. I think it's actually antithetical to the notion of getting the most number of people to the best possible finish line, let's say, and that there are better ways to do that. That's why, in fact, we see a range of strategies in Mother Nature itself.
Yes.
Because it's good to have a range of strategies. And
Yes.
so I think that those types of companies already exist in some sense. You do see this happening where a large industry will be created, and then these kinds of auxiliary industries will grow up around them and kind of attach themselves to it.
Yeah.
But when entrepreneurs are trying to design things, I think that's a helpful position to take up, that you don't have to necessarily consider yourself as an organism that's going to compete with the biggest fish. You may be more like a remora, right?
Yeah.
And yeah.
How do you keep it from getting diseased, or how do you help it recover from a disease? And in many ways, I would say that question at least can be a lot more difficult to answer than the kind of, I don't know what the right word is I think it's a little often idealistic to think that you're going to come up with a system that can replace the entire activity of human behavior on your own,
Yeah, that's what's happened. Each time that's been in place, it's like really bad.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's probably it's idealistic until you do it, right? Because chances of you actually going from the idea to the reality where it could actually be possible is a huge journey where most people will probably screw up, or not even most people will screw up, but just most ideas won't make the cut. And then those ideas need to evolve. So it's like the chance of that, so it's not idealistic if it is actually accurate. But the chance of it actually being accurate and actually implemented on that journey is unbelievably difficult.
Yes.
So how do we determine if it was the ideal that was poorly implemented or just the ideal that was incorrect in the first place?
Yeah, well, I think that's through implementation.
Matter, really.
It might not matter, really. That's a good point.
Yeah.
If it
I'm currently reading the book Blue Ocean Strategies, and that was written, I think, in the 90s or earlier. But that one talks about a blue ocean is creating a new market that then it dominates and it avoids competition. So a competitive market is a red ocean where everyone is just fighting for the scraps and the blood. And it drives profits to zero. And that's also what Peter Thiel talks about in 0 to 1, which is Peter Thiel, he only enters into markets which he can completely dominate. Same thing for Elon Musk. They only enter into markets which they will completely dominate. And then and it's interesting, they argue then, well, you get the most innovation because you get the most resources and the most potential. So for Tesla, they get the most resources and they get the best hiring. But it's also interesting because the book phrases it as it is anti-competitive. So it is more cooperative if it's executed well. Otherwise, it becomes a monopoly that goes stale, and then it fades out when competition ups it. So competition will try and eat the big fish, which set up the market.
So anti-competitive if it creates its own monopoly in a field that nobody else can enter? I guess.
Well, I mean I mean in terms of it's more collaborative, because then, say for Tesla, you can just work for Tesla. You don't always have to set up a competing company, right? Like most tech companies, they're just a feature of an existing company. They're just I can make this feature of an existing product and pretend that that's a product, right? So they'll, add a little twist on Gmail and then think that that's an actual business, and it's not. Just work at Gmail and then implement it. And then you'll have a better solution. Yeah, but the way it phrases
design environment. Sorry, the app design environment is a really interesting one to look at because it happens so rapidly and with so little physical resource required that it allows us to watch how these systems play out with really low boundaries to entry or blockages to entry.
It's fascinating to watch culture unfold. Everything is happening so quickly that we're seeing what ordinarily would have taken, say, decades in the past, just trends and politics and swings left and right. It's all just flipping before our eyes. Donald Trump Donald Trump could be on the verge of nuclear war with Iran and meeting with North Korea over the demilitarized zone, like the next day, right? Like, it's crazy.
Yeah.
How fast things are changing. And all of that's primarily because of this extraordinary frenetic activity that we have in information now.
Yeah, that's kind of the weird
is.
thing, is that like there's these pockets of like entire realities that can be like close in proximity to one another, or even like on the same internet space, but are completely like distinct and like not even comparable against each other. That is, it's hard to figure out how to interact in between these things, like going from one to the other, or even just being able to I don't know.
Right. Like, are these different environments of humanity islands, or are they an archipelago? Right. Like, is there any connection between them,
Right.
or are they in the middle of the ocean? We should probably get some clarity on that question before we dive into these tangents. So it seems your answer then is because everyone is in a cultic framework, your only way to get out of that is to just realize it for what it is, which is we are all influenced by these cultic frameworks and subscribe to these different cults. And then that is the only way that we can help prevent us from, falling, leaving one cult and then diving headfirst into the other cult, which seems to be very popular among certain people. So it's like, if you recognize that, then you would avoid it.
Recognizing is part of it, but I don't think you can actually avoid it in a proper sense. Instead, I think what makes sense as a strategy is to start thinking in terms of literally, what do I want? Mm-hmm. It's a lot different of a question than what is true, right? And that's usually the metric that we decide our cultic affiliation is what is true. And then it seems like it should work well, but asking that question actually makes us extremely vulnerable to manipulation. And I would say this is a lot of what you're seeing with the rise of it's so tricky because you can trace this back ways through human history.
Oh, it froze. Yeah, I was just to go off of his point though.
We'll let the internet buffer his thoughts for us.
How you can ask like what you want, and that's the thing, because usually the very reason that you joined a cult is because
he's back.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Go ahead, Nick.
Am I working again?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I was just saying how trying to judge things based on the truth of them actually puts us in a much more vulnerable position than the question of what do I want? And while this hasn't been the case for a while in the modern mindset, because information was hyper curated by an extremely limited group of people, which is to say the cultic network was really firmly entrenched, that's not the case anymore. So it's actually pretty dangerous to try and find out what truth is and then go look at YouTube. That's a pretty dangerous thing to do.
Yeah.
Whereas it wasn't before, because you'd go, what's the truth? And then you'd go to a college or right? There was only one place to get the information. Yeah. Now there's an infinite source of places to get the information.
And that's the thing, like those up in the authority, each were using the same principles and methods of going about things, so that, and they were like talking to each other and conforming their ideas into a fixed kind of overall worldview. But now I think, I don't know, it might be the case that we've gotten so many people, each in their specific domains, that these worldviews are, I guess, decentralizing, so that there is there's the best possible way to look about biology through the theory of evolution. But the best possible way of looking at sociology is through, some sort of, I guess, rational actor theory or something like that.
Smile and a handshake.
And then, like, along with that, you have physics, and then the different interpretations of quantum mechanics. There's all these different like systems that are being brought forward, and there's no real person that's trying to cohere them together into some unified worldview, to the point that it raises questions as to whether or not this worldview is even unified. Maybe it's just a collection of incongruent worldviews that are supposedly in touch with each other, but nobody, like, you can never pinpoint that exact point where they meet anywhere. Whereas in our history,
fuzzy boundaries, right? And there is lots of overlap and interrelationship and all these complicated, vetting processes within various cultures. But that you can hear the problem even as I try and talk on it within these various cultures, right? There's your problem, and there is also you're going to run into limits of what a human brain can process, which is, say, the YouTube problem, right? There's more than a lifetime of videos uploaded to YouTube, probably in an hour, certainly in a day, Well, what are you going to do with
300 hours per minute right now?
What is it?
About 300 hours per minute.
300 hours per minute. So, yeah, way beyond what, we could possibly deal with. And that's what it's doing, is it's making the heuristics that we're using become extremely salient, because there's no way for them not to be. And that extreme salience of the heuristics we're using is a cultic affiliation. That's it, basically.
Right.
We're using cultic structures to form heuristics to filter the amount of information we are trying to process.
Right.
And there's no good way out of this problem.
There's way too much information.
Trust the AI gods, maybe?
So speaking of this, I have a clip. So for this, there's two ways kind of solve that, which is you have people with differences, diverse, worldviews and experiences and diverse thought, and then you get them to integrate, or you get everybody to be fed the same information to try and make them have the same view. Now, check this out. This is a video clip of some Silicon Valley big time investors. This is a huge event. This is just after Trump was elected, when David McClure, a really famous investor, had a big freak out. So I've got it. Let me know to make sure you can hear it.
Are creating products that go out and they can code their ideas and have the ability to put their ideas into billions of users' hands. What can technologists do?
It's very possible to just see news that only you want to see. As technologists, we need to figure out a way to bring people together, right? Maybe it's only Zuck can save us by forcing us to all look at the same news source.
Bringing people to look at the same news source.
Oh, yeah.
I think it's hugely dangerous, though, no? I mean, then who's the one defining the news source?
We live in a
Yeah. Sorry.
Who watches the Watchmen?
Well, and this is the problem that I talked about with Paul, right? Because the people deciding what the AI is doing have cultic affiliations. And then they're just using their cult as the mechanism to decide which cult we should all be in.
I just made a joke about President Zuck. I just did it. I
think you mean God Emperor Zuck.
Yeah.
So the reason that people will enter cults is because the cults present this overarching worldview that coheres all these things that were previously discongruent with each other, maybe, and in a simplified fashion that is like perfectly tuned to our limitations in thinking, and also tuned greatly to our salience. So stemming off of what we find salient, it's just because, like, in a world where we can't trust our history or our scientists or our religions, things like that, then something that can cohere all of these things together into a unified worldview, I can see how it exactly does manipulate our salience, because that's exactly what we're seeking out. I guess that's why, cults are, I don't know, stereotyped for drawing from people that are, well, okay, it's not just cults, but also a lot of religions as well, going after people that are at their bottom rung
Or
of
banks,
the banks.
money lenders are famous, like especially the
Politicians.
edgier ones. Yes, are all very well known for going at. If
Yeah.
you're trying to get
String
people on your
theorists.
side, go after the people that need something from
Right.
String theorists are particularly rabid sometimes. The piccolo and the tuba can often get into serious trouble. There is an extraordinary range to which people will fight over supremacy over anything. They will kill each other over soccer matches.
Yep.
It's fascinating.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure what to make of that exactly, but it does
Well,
exist.
okay.
And I mean, I know
And
it's a hijacking of like really old machinery in most cases, but it's interesting for me that it exists at such a profound level on one end, and then other times, like, you know, I picture the difference in life between something like two children happily playing on a green field and the sun is rising, and then you've got like the barrios. But those two ways of living both exist at the same time, and what cultic structures contribute to the environment that produce that, and specifically how do they upregulate and downregulate, let's say, like these epigenetic expressions, right? Like how is it that so if I experience a lot of stress in my environment, right, if the cortisol levels are high, this has a profound impact on the way that my genes express themselves, and has alterations on body chemistry, like biochemistry, over long periods of time, for sure. So these notions start
with that specific example, you start looking for a system that brings you back into equilibrium as well, right?
Mhm.
There's a reason that religion works very well for people with PTSD, right?
Right.
These types of scenarios, because what it's doing is it's it gives a relief from those elevated cortisol levels.
Yeah. So you have systems of
or
thought.
can.
You have systems of thought that, as John was saying, can give you explanatory power, and that can be extremely attractive to certain kinds of people, especially people who associate themselves with maybe high in openness and desire to understand the world. But it's fascinating. You can have a physicist that's extraordinarily intelligent and spends all of their life diving into this narrow little range of physical understanding, and discovers what could be ultimate truth. And yet almost none of the knowledge they gain up and down that stack is applicable to borrowing milk from the neighbor next door.
Yeah.
And the cultic explanatory power of that framework, it has no bearing on the rest of the world. Right? It has no explanatory power in that sense, and yet it has extraordinary explanatory power in that narrow range, in that perspective.
And I think what is actually helpful, the kind of silver lining to the situation that looks like is developing, is that it's putting a really high price on synthesis, right? You're looking for the person, in a sense. The scenario we're dealing with is looking for the person that can connect what that physicist is doing. Sorry, I don't know if you could hear that.
No.
To
high price,
borrowing milk
high
from
value,
your neighbor.
High value.
High value.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Gotcha. Yeah, for sure. High value on synthesis. That's exactly what we need, because we have so much. We have such a proliferation of all these various minor versions of these stories of how to understand the world, that people are always looking for these organizing principles, right? That kind of neatly tie things up in a more elegant bow. Yep. Heuristics are what we want. And that's how our brains work.
And I do think it's useful, the environment in which this is happening, or at least it would be, I think, more helpful if the value as it is represented in how we feel about it was also represented in like, if you're talking about synthesis, you want to synthesize those two aspects: value as represented in the economic with value as represented in the lived experience.
Yeah.
And those are pretty divorced from each other right now. Hence the whole, after you get above you know, the equivalent of whatever it is, 80 grand a year or something like that.
Yeah.
There's no increase in your happiness as your wealth keeps going.
You want to know why?
So-
Because money. That's all right. That's money.
Because everything costs more now.
Because everything because of money's infinite fungibility. It can turn into anything else. It can literally turn into anything else. So once you get above a certain amount, it's like magic. It's like
True.
poof, it exists, poof, it exists, poof, it exists. And everybody knows from all the fairy tales that once that happens, you turn into a hedonistic mess. Right.
It's
and
true.
it's like there's like only very few people can navigate that successfully. And it's usually by ignoring that aspect of their extraordinary wealth. They like go to work insanely hard or something and just build an empire. But yeah, once you get that power to, there was this great book by Michael Crichton called Sphere that everyone should read if they have a chance.
I've read most of his other ones, but I never got around to that one.
Yeah, it's about an alien craft that comes to Earth, and it gives people who enter it the power to. Oh, I just ruined the book for everyone. But I'm from the 90s, people. Spoiler alert. It's an alien craft that gives anyone who enters into it the power to materialize their thoughts, no matter how crazy they are. And you know, the terror of the novel, of course, is that no one has good control of their thoughts, and they materialize some
Creates nightmarish landscapes quite rapidly.
Right. And he doesn't even go all that far afield, frankly, because my mind doesn't.
Yeah, that's
Crichton.
well, and
pretty tame.
yeah.
Yeah, that's the thing. Now, yeah, I can kind of see where you're getting at with like power corrupts. Absolute power corrupts, absolutely.
Okay, here's another interesting effect, though, is the rise of LARPing in all of its various forms.
Mm-hmm.
So not only do you have it in the sense of like, you know, literally going to the park in a suit of armor and smacking each other with foam swords or whatever, but
just drove
you know,
my kids by that this afternoon. right next to the guy who was almost certainly nodding off with a needle in his arm.
Jeez. That's gonna break your LARPing experience.
Yeah, I don't think they didn't seem to mind. It's a small park and they have to fight for space.
I guess if you're already pretending that you're in the 1800s.
Yeah, it's just one more step to kick the guy. Well, and it's interesting too. I don't know about you guys, but my favorite game to play as a young kid, I literally just called Imagination Land. And I'd grab a stick and just imagine an entire world for hours. Like a really long time. So I don't know.
Yeah,
there
that's
is
not super common, but I definitely did it too.
Okay.
All right. So you were bringing back how LARPing is like coming into the modern.
Yes. So there is this interesting. Now that's also, you could say, a very blatant cultic structure. Right. You're literally adopting
like an ironic cultic structure where you recognize that it's a farce, but yet you still accept it. I guess I don't know if this would be
but that's the interesting part. The recognizing that it's a farce is what allows the person to give up to it. It's what allows them to move deeper into it, right? It's the weird quality that once you know you're playing a game, you can actually embody it with more of your life than if you thought it wasn't a game. Yep. It's a really weird, you see this mythologically created over and over again too. That's why so many religions focus on deal with death before you die. Because what it does is it changes the dynamics of what it means to be alive. You're no longer playing the game of life as a reality. You're playing it as a game.
Well, I think
I guess then you would be all in, because like
that's exactly it.
Because you're like, if you're living within two worlds, you're always kind of keeping one foot over in the other world.
Yes.
If that other world recognizes, oh, I'm going to be in this world for a little bit. I can do this, because I guess there's kind of the recognition that this is a safe enough world to.
You're literally reducing your cognitive dissonance. That's all it is.
No,
you're not constantly trying to pull.
Uh-oh.
Oh.
For either he will hate the one and cling to the other.
Yeah, there's that element.
Again.
Well, so all right, so you get two options though. That's what happens once you discover it's a game. You get two options, and this is actually the moment that consciousness arises. I think it's when you discover the first game that you're in, called life, and you wake up to the very first.
That it's a game.
Well, you don't have the word game for it, but you realize that there is a set of rules, and that you've been playing them, and that you have the choice to whether or not to follow some of them. And you're like, oh, okay. And then you have the first choice. Do I go deeper into that game and follow the rules that I know, or do I leave that game and do something different? And it's always that choice. You go deeper into your cultic framework, or you rise and leave it.
Well, see, now that just brings up like the conversation we were having before the broadcast of the Garden of Eden story, where that's the first rejection of a rule set.
Yep.
Or I don't know, because you did bring up a good point that like from their perspective, like they don't have the capacity to consider that someone might be lying to them, like the snake might be.
Yes,
lying to them. That's it.
Yeah, everything is good. Yeah.
That's the weird thing.
It's a self-defeating game.
That's the weird thing about the story, though, is like if you look at it, like the snake doesn't necessarily lie. Like he
True. Yeah, that's a
he
good
like
point.
bends the truth, I guess, or presents only a certain aspect of the truth to them. And then they fall for it, and here we are.
Another danger of overly believing in the. It's not so much believing in the concept of truth as much as it is believing that the concept of truth can actually be obtained by a person. That's the dangerous part, right? There's nothing wrong with the concept of truth because it's a direction. It gives you an aim. It adds a fire to the
that you've finally attained
cardinality.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Once you've arrived, then right, you have no more direction.
Yeah.
Well, once you get to a pole, then all other directions are the other pole, right? Like you've got no.
Yes.
Yeah, that's kind of my worries, I guess, about the concept of truth, is like holding it up as primary while it is this sort of static thing that is a collection of propositions.
Mm-hmm.
That it's once you have this collection, then like what do you do from there exactly? Or even like if you recognize that this collection of propositions is too complex or too expansive for any one mind to hold, then it also can be kind of debilitating. And I think that's why like certain heuristics, I don't know.
I'd say it's telling you that you've been playing the wrong game when you reach those points, because the goal is not to codify truth or reality into a perfect set of symbols. Right. The actual goal is to fully embody the experience of living. That's what truth is, if you're going to call it anything. That's why when we try and define it, at least in the classical forms of a religion, right? When Christ says, I am the truth, he's not saying I'm a set of propositions. He's embodying it with the actual experience of life. So you could say that truth is purely dynamic. And because it's purely dynamic, you have to measure or judge it by something other than propositional.
Right.
Information.
He sandwiches that word with dynamic notions on either side. I am the way, the truth, and the life. Right. It's this notion that like there's a continuum to things, right? It's absolutely an integral part of avoiding the dominance of the ego, something like that.
Actually, I just realized too, this brings us right back to Einstein's relativity, which I don't know if we were recording when we talked about that, but right with Einstein's relativity, you throw out the idea of a external objective truth that's the same from all frames, but within the frame you are referencing, there is a correct description. There is a truth.
Right.
But it's locked within the frame.
Yep.
Yeah.
You can't get it out of there. So there is a correct path
Well,
for
you can
every
get it out of
single
there.
moment of your life. It's just not one you can ever extract out of those moments of your life.
Well, you can because we're doing it right now.
Yeah. Well,
No,
to
Nick,
a
we're doing it
degree.
right now. I am a subjective particle point. Like it's a weird conscious point right here.
It's
And I'm
moments
transmitting
between-
strange information
That's
to
true.
you. And I believe that you're receiving it also as a point particle of consciousness and somehow
Yeah.
processing it and then sending it back. It's actually happening somehow.
That is interesting
it's-
because
but
that relationship wouldn't be possible otherwise.
Well, that's
but-
what we're
that
doing.
gets
What
confusing.
we're sitting in is this incredibly complex machine that somehow has the capacity to translate this subjective experience up and down this stack. Right? That's what we were describing before. That this,
Yeah.
like, you give me information and it goes into this weird stack that compresses down and then comes back up, and I give it back to you from my subjective perspective. And we're both agreeing that that's happening. So
Yeah.
somehow two locales from separate, distal places in the universe are communicating with each other through an incredibly complex stack of translated languages, their own perspective from that spot.
The thing is, though, like, in order for that to occur, there has to be like this element of good faith between the two subjective creatures. Otherwise, there's this either a sense of miscommunication where, like, one person speaking Japanese, the other person is speaking English, and there's no capacity for them to share a subjective experience between them.
Mm-hmm.
Or somebody's speaking English, but is like, it is somebody that their values run completely contrary to the other person that they're talking to. And there's a distaste to try to interpret their subjective experience truthfully.
Yeah.
Rather, it has to go through some sort of, I guess, misinterpretation framework in order to retain that enemy-like status between them, so that there no subjective no subjective interconnection between the two can occur. And I think that's how I think of, I guess, free will is the capacity to accept or to deny, like, for any interaction. But I don't even, like, you can just roll it back one layer from that, like, okay, well, that's just deterministically drawn from whatever your values are.
So
you do this. So
the way I've dealt with free will is that it's more of a question of what are you going to give yourself away to. But you're always giving yourself away to something. But there is an aspect of choice there. So it's free, but it's also not free at all, right? You're free to choose the manner in which you have no free will.
Right. like you have like a set of, let's say, biological drives or needs or necessities, whatever. And with every action, you can
boundary conditions. You
can, like, satisfy one of those drives or multiple of those drives at a time. But in order to do any of that, you have to, like, choose which one you're going to do. This is kind of a common example we use, but Burdon's ass, where the donkey is both intensely thirsty and intensely hungry at the same time, and is presented with a pile of hay and a bucket of water, the exact same distance apart from one another. And how does he choose?
Probably water, because you can go longer without food than without water.
Yeah, probably.
But then you can just change the thought experiment so that the time scales are equal.
Or you could just have it two piles of hay or something like that. Of course, I guess then it's still using the same biological necessity.
Yeah. Well, you could make it so that he had water 2 days ago, but he hasn't had food. For 2 weeks or whatever, to make it so that it balances correctly.
When's the last time you felt a sense of true wonder and awe?
It's been a while. Sadly.
It's usually like it almost seems like it's always dependent upon the weather. So a couple of
That's a great line.
Like like okay, so I just watched La La Land, and I think that was also a good portion of it. And as I was exiting the theater, like while the movie was playing, like a foot of snow had fallen, and it was nighttime now. So snow was still falling, and so as soon as it was like entering into a new world that's always kind of the thing after you leave a movie theater. But this one was a world that I hadn't been in prior to that, and it's especially with the like sense of enjoyment and beauty within the movie just prior to that, and then being able to like enter into this magical snow globe of. That's the thing, like when it's night and it's snowing and there's lights out and all those things like that, I don't know, you can't help but have a sense of awe. Another time would probably be during the solar eclipse that happened recently-ish.
Oh, did you were within the stripe?
Yeah. It was pretty surreal, just for the world to go dark for what, like 3 minutes or so, was it? It's just, yeah, it was a weird one. Like I can understand now, like how the mystical thought enters into humanity's.
What's the weirdest part about it? I drove my kids up there to see it.
Oh yeah. It's.
What would you say is the weirdest part?
It's so wrong. It's like it's daytime and then suddenly it's nighttime for a couple of minutes and then it's daytime again.
For me, it was the temperature change.
Oh, I don't even know.
So dramatic. It's unbelievably dramatic. It's like instantaneously drops 10 degrees. Temperature just disappears. Sudden total blocking of all that energy, and you can feel it, right? It's a chilling in your soul, and at the same time, it's just gone. Like it's really gone. Like dark gone. Like, so dark. I was not expecting it to be that dark.
Yeah.
Because I was still looking through the dark shades, right? I had actually made my own, like, I'd fashioned some. I'd cut them out from the cheap ones, and I'd kind of welded them into these swimming goggles for my kids.
Uh-huh.
So when it came, I was completely blinded. Right, I took it off, and it was so eerie. You're right, yeah, man. Those ancient people, absolutely.
Anyway, you brought that up, and then I kind of derailed us. Like, when was the last time you felt awe?
Yeah, so Einstein said something like, "He who can no longer pause and stand wrapped with awe is as good as dead, for his eyes are closed." There's this really important element of mystery that has to do with growth and searching, I think. Like there's an element of consciousness that seeks. Our eyes are always looking around. Our ears are always trying to search for things. Like there's a seeking element to consciousness, and part of that. We got two Nicks. Part of that is needing something magnetic, right? So as Nick was alluding to earlier, you choose what kind of resources you attach yourself into the environment based on your choice space. Our own biological drives are kind of our choice space. And we get to choose which ones we prefer to attach ourselves, let's say. Or we fight against some of those really strong choices, right? Like inheriting alcoholism from your father, right? This is a choice space you now exist within. And many people experience that as like a struggle to escape it. To play a different cultic game that other people play, right? Like, oh, I want to do a porn addiction. I'm sick of this alcohol addiction. I want to try that. Or it's time to pick up cigarettes. Or I really like being a workaholic. I just pick something. But yeah, it's almost like our brains have to be doing something. And some of these things work as better games than others. It's the very Piagetian notion that games are defined essentially as good or bad by their capacity to iterate through time. Yeah. And to invite as many people to play, let's say, that's another really good metric. Because again, when you don't invite as many people to play and they're not as happy playing, those are the ones that get squeezed out to the edge and start to criticize you and attack you from the corners. That's how you... Yeah, when your current system is, like, when you look at capitalism and view it as a infallible cultic structure, then all of the people that are harmed by ignoring the true faults of something like what is involved in the development of corporatism or something, you start to ignore this large mass of people, and suddenly you have, Hillary Clinton versus Donald Trump, and then suddenly you have fighting on the streets between Antifa.
Yeah, you're suddenly playing a game that not everybody is willing to play and are actually trying to play a different game.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's just ignoring, I think, the people that were nearby you and not listening to their complaints about how the game was being played allowed them to, or pushed them naturally outside of the system so that they had to criticize it. Some of those criticisms are going to be valid. Others are going to be just, nonsense that comes out of the mouth because of anger or resentment.
Right. I'm reading a book currently called Die Empty, and it's interesting. So they've put the onus of that on two sides. One of the individual, that they should take agency of their career and their life in their hands and voice their frustrations. Because if they don't voice their frustrations, then they put the agency into the hands of those who have the power. And that's pretty interesting, especially from like employee dynamics, because if you're holding back your work, then you're then putting the power of your performance in your boss. When instead, if you reclaim it and you have those difficult conversations with your boss, and throughout the whole time, then you actually have agency of your work. But then the same can be, but at the same time, the boss or the politician also needs, like, not everyone has that type of capacity of agency from the get-go. It's something that can also be fostered. And it seems like a good democracy requires that capacity to be developed in its participants. And the same thing as a good company requires the capacity for the participants to contribute and to challenge. Both Steve Jobs, and there was another example in the book, they fostered dissent within the companies. And Steve Jobs had an analogy, which is, to polish rocks, you get rocks and you get grit, and you put them in a machine and it just tumbles them for like 24 hours. And then you get polished rocks. So the idea was, from the rocks banging against each other relentlessly for 24 hours, you get something polished. You get polished, refined ideas. And that seems like that's how Steve, started going about companies with Next and After. But that seems to be forgotten. Like, there was also an example in the book, a great quote. I'm not going to find it now, but where this lady worked for a big firm, and then she said, we've created this diversity of intention within the company, or diversity of thought, and then that actually resulted in really good things. And it's just like, well, that seems the value of diversity. But it's interesting, like, the agency can either be on Antifa to correctly voice their opinions without being spoiled children throwing tantrums, and the other side is for the politicians to correctly listen to the population and make sure that those situations never occur.
Well, I think also it's, all that's exactly right. And I think it's also the gap between the stated power that people have through the vote and the democratic institutions that they participate in, and the actual power. How much of the population actually has any real influence on the structure of the world they live in?
Yeah, right? And I think that's like a big thing, is like, when a person becomes upset with the system, when they feel that their influence on it is arbitrary.
Mm-hmm. And it is also no longer supporting their innate needs, or someone's convinced them that it hasn't, because that happens too.
Yeah.
Right. Like right now, we have an extraordinarily large number of people experiencing life previously unheard of, and yet they're considered in poverty. So,
well, there's the problem just that the body itself is a relative measuring mechanism.
Yeah.
We only know hot through cold. That's why if your hands are freezing and you put them in lukewarm water, it feels like it's burning. Now, there is a point where it's like, well, it's hot when your skin is blistering, right? There's a physical limit there.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. But we will often mistake that physical limit for the artificial limit. You know.
Yeah, but even still, like subjectively, it is burning to you. Like you can't hold your hand in there for
hand in the lukewarm water.
I can.
Yeah. You can just by holding it down, but it's still painful.
I love pain, baby.
All right, Ichi.
I've had to live with it for I've had to live with it for so long now. So pain's just a signal, right? It's an extraordinarily powerful one, but yeah, there's a. You okay?
I think he was
okay.
To his wife.
That would sound like maybe he fell over or something. Yeah. So when I was younger, I was always fascinated with the concept of what pain was, and I had this kind of innate sense that I had to be strong enough to handle certain pains. It's very masculine, right? It's like the kind of stuff you hear fathers telling sons or bullies telling just deal with it, walk it off, all that. It's
no pain, no gain.
No pain, no gain. Yeah, it's very masculine, right? But so I've really worked on that. I don't know. It's like a skill, right? Yeah. It's like a skill you develop to understand that type of language.
And it's funny, just this popped up in my head, but I've noticed, I make knives, and so I'm burning my hands all day long, just all day, every day. And there is a weird tinge of satisfaction or almost excitement that comes when I am like, oh man, I really fucked up my hands today. Like there's a weird, I don't know what it is. Something in me is like, yeah, I really did something,
Yeah. Right. Mark on the world is mark on you.
Yeah, because it doesn't happen too often. So like whenever there's this chance to test your limits, I think it's kind of fun to go through, because the same thing kind of happens to me. Like whenever I find like a hot piece of metal or something like that, I'll try to push my hand on it to see how long it can last.
How long you can last.
And then I'll take my other hand and push it down even harder. That way I can't pull it off in time.
This is that's a great test. That is a great test.
Yeah, it's
interesting.
I don't know why we do it, but I mean, it's. I guess part of it is just to prove that I'm not a slave to the pain. Is some of it, and then that's kind of like what you had mentioned earlier, Nick. That like we might not have free will, but at least we can choose who we enslave ourselves to.
Yeah.
So, well, that was my sense of it exactly. That I didn't want to be forced around by pain. I didn't want to be limited by pain, and so I wanted to find what the limits were, and then push past them. And that's what I think masculine energy does. It's the amplitude modulator for up, whereas the masculine is opposed to the feminine, which is the amplitude modulator for down.
So it's like you can subordinate pain to your will, or you can subordinate your will to the pain, and that's like the choice that you're given.
That's always the choice.
You brought up masculine and feminine too, which is really interesting in this specific discussion, because the feminine arguably has a much higher tolerance for pain. And that's
what they say.
I would presume that childbirth is quite painful. Granted, you get the floods of chemicals that help you deal with it. But what I wanted to focus on was there's almost a bizarre fascination going on there, where it's almost like the masculine has to try and rise up externally to external pain in the way that to at least the limit that the feminine rises up to internal pain. Quite literally internal and external.
Yeah, well, so that's interesting. It's interesting too, because I think the preferred method for feminine harm is internalized, right? Like they attempt to harm each other with reputation first, and men are like, no, fisticuffs.
Yeah,
at dawn.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah, punch me in the face. Don't talk behind my back or whatever the situation is.
Hey, I'll be right back.
All right. Cool. So that actually. This topic is my subtle way of trying to get into one of the topics that's been on my mind last couple of days that I think I brought up in the email in regards to authority. And so, like, thinking about, I guess, free will in that fashion, where we can choose to what it is that we will subordinate our wills to. It seems like this is kind of a common aspect to cults, is that in order for a cult to form, there has to be a prominent leader type figure that people will be willing to subordinate their wills towards. Like, even just like a cult of personality, something like that, where there's somebody that is so, like, incredible and that has this charismatic way of speaking that really connects to you when he talks to you. Like, there's nobody else in the world. And there's just this feeling of, like, I want to be like this person. How did he become this way? I'm going to buy
It
all.
can also be through battle, is a very common one. So, for instance, my final cult, it wasn't they were charismatic or anything like that. It was literally, I was at the very peak of my game and I wanted to destroy this person and I couldn't. And then the natural response to losing the fight was, this person has something to teach me so that I can fight as well as they can.
That's interesting. I wonder how many other, like, people enter into those types of situations as well.
Probably not if you're using, like, the stereotype of cult. Although it's the same when you look at Christ or when you look at a king or when you, like, you can branch it outside of its.
I was thinking, like, just like figures who, like, oh, this guy is real successful and popular. He's probably some sort of huckster. And then once you start to get to know him, like, I don't know, maybe that it's not too prominent. But even besides that, there's, like, this element of cultishness for it as well, where, like, you adopt an identity against some other, like, person or figure. Like, even if you're not part of the cultish fan club, the
counterculture necessarily bases itself off the culture.
Right.
You know, it's not actually something different. It's the necessary antagonism of the dominant culture. And that's, we could say, the problem with counterculture is that it always defines itself in opposition to the culture. And because of that, it never makes anything legitimately new.
Right.
You know?
Yeah, it's just this, like, eternal spirit of critique that is tearing down. And then that's the thing, like, once you tear down the prominent culture, then, like, it almost, like, takes away the very surviving thing that the counterculture was living off of as well.
Yes, exactly. It's why usually when that does happen, you get a sudden rise in nihilism or some similar, you know, either that or there's a power vacuum and people immediately start polling for whatever figure they can, some strong man to reestablish, you know. You see this in leftist revolutions all the time. They win, and then they get stuck with, you know, Mao or Stalin or whatever, Hitler, right? It's now part of that's that you need a hyper powerful figure, right? This is a problem with power. The only way to defeat a concentrated source of power is with a more concentrated source of power. Or at least that's how we usually go about it. So you end up in a kind of redundant.
Yeah. And then, like, as soon as that one's taken care of, then now this one's in power, and, like, that's
up and up and up and up and up. I would argue this is actually
Hey, what killed the aliens in War of the Worlds?
It was, what was it, oxygen? Or was it just the liquid?
Shampoo. No.
Oh, wait, War of the Worlds.
It was
That's a different one.
Germs.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Would you say the little bacteria is more powerful than a human being? Or a whole fleet of aliens?
Yes. Okay, so that's interesting. That's the thing. So
right. I'll be right back.
when you, like, create this power vacuum, like, where you are the center and everything within your realm is in your control, you weaken your immune system to the things outside of your domain. So everything in your domain, you have absolute power over. But because you don't interact with the outside world, then you might build up upon yourself to a point that something that is commonplace in the outside world, that if you were to go
is catastrophic
try to inhabit,
for you.
Will be catastrophic for you.
What if via the panspermia method, planet Earth is actually the home place of bacteria that was created as unicellular forms of life all across the galactic plane, and we're inoculated to our local galactic environment? What if? Okay, I'll be right back.
So like
the constant I'll be right back.
He's just got to pop in and then just lay another bomb foundation to it.
Yeah, okay, here's maybe a touchstone, at least for the previous one. Because I think when you start thinking in pragmatic terms of cults, the next obvious question is what makes a healthy cult as opposed to an unhealthy one.
Yeah.
How do you end up with these really creepy, what we would call now colloquial cultic structures?
Mm-hmm.
And what is making them that way as opposed to the cult I'm in now, which is way better, you know?
That's
so one of the things is isolation.
Right.
So the dominant function of a cult is to form a unified worldview. Well, and this gets back into a point you brought up earlier too. But that means that its primary mode of action should be consumption. It should be consuming the world better than any competing cult. And the product it creates through that consumption is the worldview.
Mm-hmm.
Now, when it doesn't do that, and instead it isolates, which gets into the thing with Facebook, right? You know, we're just going to make sure everyone reads the same news story. Well, now you've opened it up to it takes nothing, the tiniest, counter narrative to ruin the image or to break the, some tiny undigestible bit now just totally breaks your system. And that you see very commonly. It really it doesn't have to be isolationist in the sense of the famous one, Jonestown, right? It can be isolationist in the sense of Germany in the 40s, or you can still form extremely large systems that are isolationist in nature, and it develops the same negative characteristics. Amway?
Yeah.
Mary Kay. I don't know. Pick any multi-level marketing scheme.
Oh, yes. Yeah. Oh, those are pyramid schemes, man. They're everywhere.
I think
we're obsessed with that shape, the pyramid.
Well, I think it draws upon probably the same instinct that drives people to buy lottery tickets, is that it comes with the allure of getting rich without having to do much.
Yeah. You mean in the sense with multi-level marketing. Yeah. Well, and it's interesting. What I connected it to when you said that was the isolationist cults, because it's the same thing, right? You can make a fully unified worldview that takes nothing. You can just pop it out of your freaking hat. It doesn't take the hard work of synthesizing it with the world as the world is happening. It's just
okay. So
creating a fantasy and plopping it on top.
Maybe that's the difference between a cultic worldview and a normalized cultic worldview. It is a normalized cultic worldview is one that can be expounded upon.
Semi-permeability membrane.
New information can be brought into the system that runs contrary to other things that were already in the system.
The problem is that you still, even if you accept that as a normalized view, you can still develop systems that all of us would then go, oh, that's clearly a cult. So the problem is that you can bend that story way outside of what we would call normalized parameters, and it would still be able to perform the function of consuming and having permeable
I guess
boundaries.
That's true, because like cults still go through
Be right back.
iterations, and like
Right.
this is volume 2 of cult. Take your cult of choice. What is there? Isn't there like what 6 volumes of Dianetics now, or I don't know. But I think they are like updating across each other still over time. But I don't know. Yeah, I guess it wouldn't make much difference. They could just, like, whoever's in power now can just change something that was the norm, 5 years ago, so that they've technically updated their information, and through a new set of perspective that it doesn't work with their old versions, and they're just throwing out the old version.
Right. Well, you're going to have people who, to backtrack on what was kind of communicated in the last bit, because there was so much there, and that was really profound. So the idea where it's more like socially, we also have like a social immune system, and then social exposure to alternative cults or worldviews, then that actually improves our immune system. And the immune system can operate in 2 ways. One is elimination, and the other one is assimilation, right? So one is the things that we receive actually makes us stronger, and the other one is we get better at eliminating the competition. So some diseases, well, not diseases because that's disease, but some things actually seem to be symbiotic and beneficial to human adaptation. So it seems maybe worms are one of those things. There's certain, immunotherapy, they found that one of the treatments for that is actually to give people certain worms into their body, because it seems throughout history, a large portion of the population has always existed with worms inside them. So it seems like it's a symbiotic relationship. When other times, then our immune system does the expulsion. So that's like Nazi Germany with the Jews. It's a counter worldview that they find parasitic, so then they eliminate it. So just like you're building antibodies against it. So the antibodies is like the propaganda of Nazi or Japanese regime to say, the Chinese or the Jews are the parasite, and then we're building antibodies against it to eliminate it. And then you kind of have this immunity within, where any foreign body inside that culture is quickly purged.
Right.
Or the alternative is you have, so that could be maladaptive in terms of it doesn't allow integration with alternative cults. It's just, you still have cult on cult competition. Where an adaptive, so use psychotherapy perspective with maladaptive traits or even maladaptive traits or maladaptive behaviors and adaptive behaviors. And adaptive behavior is one that allows you to have greater agency. When a maladaptive agency is kind of controlling you. So then you want an adaptive cult or cultic framework that's actually allowing you to integrate with other cults. So that way it's not competing with other cults unless absolutely necessary. You're trying to assimilate with other cults and make you stronger.
Right.
The other part.
Go ahead, Nick.
Sorry. Oh, I was just going to say the other part is that this competition isn't necessarily bad either. It's not bad for the cults to compete with each other, but it does matter how they're competing with each other. So you brought up those 2 processes. Ideally, when one cult confronts another, it would be doing both at the same time. So it would go into the framework, pull out all the bits that it can synthesize with, and then try and remove the antagonistic bits. And the ideal situation would be where one cult was able to pull all of the good information out, reject all the bad, such that every member of the competing cult now wants to be part of the new synthesis, right?
Like the religions have evolved over centuries. That's been their goal.
Yes, absolutely.
All right. Before we get into religions and cults, I wanted to draw from what you were saying there, Ben, about how being inoculated from these like counter cults, and I think also what you were saying, Nick, how when a cult draws into isolationism, that's like a precursor to destruction, perhaps.
Yeah, I would consider it one.
Yeah.
It's also similar to like when a nation gets infected by a plague, right? So a culture gets infected by a plague, then they isolate themselves. They isolate the members.
Well, it's funny because like when a culture
to avoid further infection and further devastation,
well,
right? An infection by the alternative. Yeah.
I like that we use cultures for bacteria as well, right? Like it's cults of bacteria. And the metaphor is actually really pretty strong.
Right.
Yeah. Okay.
Sorry.
That's Peterson. He talks a lot actually about your biome within your body. Your bacterial biome actually affects your personality greatly. So it could be certain diseases also affect your personality, and that's really interesting. So not only do we have these cults of bacteria that are affecting us, we also have cults of ideas that are affecting us and actually altering our behavior. Right. So we needed a good immune system.
That's the weird thing to think about is like there's both these exactly the things that are below, like the things we're actually built out of that are controlling our behavior in certain ways without our knowledge of it, as well as the very ideas that we have that are framing the way that we look at a thing, changing the way that we interact with it, which then also has its larger scale consequences to that. Okay, but from isolationism and the inoculation to counterculture ideas. Maybe that's it. Like the beneficial cult is one that.
Wait, why would you want to get inoculated against counterculture ideas?
Well,
in order for
successful cultures don't actually. Capitalism is famous for being able to pull the counterculture into the dominant culture rapidly. Yeah. That's why punk, for instance, goes from being a radical movement to being hot topic in the period of 10 years.
Wow.
Right.
Well, there's a fairly convincing story that it was kind of started that way anyways, with the whole Misfits and the clothing line that was run through. I can't remember that guy's name. I'm terrible with names. I'm sorry, Guy. You're very famous. But
okay, so does that make capitalism then sort of like anti-fragile? Because
exceptionally anti-fragile.
It's
aggressively anti-fragile.
That's the thing. Like on Patreon, the I think one of the highest highest income pages is Chapo Trap House, which is a hard left-wing communist podcast. So like,
I didn't know that they were one of the top, if not the top.
I believe I heard it somewhere.
I've never actually looked at that stack. That's interesting.
Yeah. That is so crazy. So if the counterculture within capitalism rises to such a great degree that it can be profitable, then it can succeed within the very market itself. That is so weird.
I would say that's one of the primary advantages of capitalism.
Yeah.
That ability to consume the world at an insane pace,
Yeah, what if it's
totally anti-isolationist?
What if it's also the great temptation?
Well, so then, right, the next question, that's one quality covered. The next question is it iterable? And that's where it looks like it starts to get a little shaky on its legs. And that's where I would, if I was trying to deal with this problem, I would try and put counterbalances in with its iterability.
Yeah.
Right. It's almost all consuming. And that becomes a problem.
What sort of counterbalances would you consider worth at least attempting to implement?
Personally, I think that the problem is actually with how we have structured our concepts of value and how they are represented in money. I think that's where our largest error is, and it takes place in a couple different ways. But I think basically that we've highlighted the least important aspects of human life and have no good. It's almost like the truly valuable aspects of human life are so valuable, or we've almost built a kind of sacredness around them that we refuse
a monetary.
What is the route to
Yes.
get to all of them? What path must you take to get to all of them? Money. Money. That's how we. That's every dream you have now.
Is shaped.
That's
by,
what you need.
Yeah.
That's the path you must take to get there. That's step N -1 to get to what you want in this culture. You have
scheme.
to have.
Yeah.
There seems where we're
the way the world
talking.
seems to be built. That's the whole point.
There seems to be very Americanism now because
Well,
when you guys are talking about
the expression of capitalism in America.
Yeah, this is another issue. There's the cultic framework at play in this discussion right now about capitalism that I'm not particularly as attuned to picking up on what's actually being discussed right now.
but what you were saying, Nick, it reminded me, I read Andrew Yang's book, The War on Normal People, and he presented an idea that I think, at least in concept, seems akin to what you were saying there, because Andrew Yang is a Democratic candidate for presidency, polling at like 2%, and he's running on like a universal basic income of $1,000 a month for the American population. Anyway, he brought up this idea of, I guess, something like, I forget the term that he used, but it's basically like social points where you can be rewarded for being sociable with like helping your neighbors out or doing something like that. Yeah. And it's not directly tied to our monetary system. So it's like
that I think is the best system, is having two hierarchical systems that are able to trade amongst themselves.
Right. So
but I don't think it would be a good idea to take just money and start rewarding other things. Well, that's how you end up with like prostitution instead of actual meaningful.
But you're going to have the exact same situation with this new currency that is for that though, because you're still doing prostitution. It's just for a different currency, right? So rather than being for USD, it's now for the social currency, right?
Well, yes.
And you already have this with. You already have this with marketers, right? Like those sleazy people who are trying to pull influence on you via favor banks or via different things. So, if you, Cialdini, he has a book called Influence, and he talks about all these strategies that marketers are deploying to try and persuade our unconscious without us even realizing. So, if they do something nice for us, like they buy us a drink at the beginning of a meeting, then we're more likely to sign at the end of the meeting because of the reciprocity. We feel somewhat obligated to this person. So it seems like, that's also like a currency of reciprocity, which is inbuilt to us. And then they're kind of exploiting that, because at the end of the day, like money is just a symbol for stored value. So we've contributed value, and then it's being stored.
Yes, but it functions on it functions on specific means of reward. And I would say that the manipulation that you're talking about with the marketers there is actually due to the fact that we don't have any type of formal system for judging those values. And because of that, we're able to fudge it. You could imagine it as similar to like back in the day when we didn't have money. So if you had 2 chickens and you wanted a goat, you had to go find someone that was willing to take your 2 chickens for a goat. Well, is 2 chickens actually worth a goat? So because of that fuzziness, because we don't have a direct means to count, what it allows people to do is manipulate our sense of value.
Yes.
You know?
Right. Because
And
it's whitewashes. It whitewashes value.
Wait. But that's exactly the benefit of money, right? Because the thing is that, you know, the 2 chickens is completely useless. He doesn't want the 2 chickens, right?
I'm not arguing against
but then
money.
Someone else,
Yeah.
chickens.
All I'm saying is that we
I'm
need
saying
to
is a
count
feature. It's a
that is the
beneficial
feature.
property.
It is.
But listen,
Right.
listen.
That's what I'm saying. We need to develop that for this other set of value structures that is not well represented by the currency systems that we are currently using.
Imagine you're sitting in a marketplace, okay? And we're all sitting there and you want to know what to do in the marketplace, what goods to sell, whatever, right? And 2 guys stand up, and they're the richest guys in the field, and they're like, we're going to do this, all right? And they're both going to stand up and talk to you about what to do. And let's say they both are equally rich. They both have the same amount of money. And so in most people's eyes, they are kind of equally powerful in determining what the market should do. Now, that's fine and dandy. But when I look at person A, they got their money from running sheep farms through Iowa or something, right? And then look at person B, and all of their money came from dark money in Russia. And the only way you would know that is if you looked. And all of the value that we ordinarily associate with, like, say, who you would trust in a particular marketplace is completely scrubbed by the fact that when it's presented to you as money, you cannot extrapolate the history of, say, value that's where the money truly came from and what it represents as value in the economy other than money.
And this is actually kind of the one thing.
But this is where we have there's a progressive lane there, because different people are going to consider those things to be different, right? Like libertarians, they think that, you know, free trade on drugs is fine, generally, because and also a large amount of liberals also kind of view that as well. The government should stay out of regulating of drugs. That drug should be free to purchase no matter its thing, because it's an expression of liberty and agency.
Yeah,
it's not
a problem of differences, though. It's not a problem of differences. It's just a problem that nobody really knows anything, right? There's no knowledge. Like, you can't even figure out if you don't like it.
Well, and the problem he brought up is a good one, which is that if you do create this value system, you are, in a sense, overly forming the culture that everyone then belongs to, which you could make the same argument of the dollar, although it's tricky. It's not overt. But one possible answer to that is multiple. Basically, it's now a hobby to create a currency.
Yes.
That's just, you know, so that's something that needs to be explored. And it's there waiting to be explored, and we haven't done anything cool with it. Like,
we're turning electrons into very, very rich people.
Yeah.
Well, I'm still confused though, because the only way to get money is to give someone what they wanted. And there's ways to then the exploitative aspect of capitalism comes where you start implementing coercion. And this is why labor unions are formed, and why the human rights is this counterbalance to capitalism. Because, you know, if you then say, I'm going to give you what you want, and you're selling water, and then you then start, you know, eliminating the alternatives for water, so you actually start polluting the water supplies, right, the natural water supplies, so then people have to buy your water, then that's bad. But then you're still like, it's bad, but like, it's fine. Like, within a capitalist model, that's capitalistic, that's fine. But then I guess that's what you're meaning by the social credit type thing. Because that's the type of thing which
we already have a social credit.
Wait. Let me because this is something I think the Americans are taking for granted. Like, it's just implicit knowledge, right? But this isn't implicit knowledge, right? But because the thing here is, so that would be the example, which is that but we already have, well, to some extent, there's laws and there's regulations to kind of protect it. But that's where capitalism in its ideal is you give people what you want. But then an example like polluting the water supply so you can sell people water, which they want water. So you're still giving people what they want, but the way of acquiring that want from people is a little bit on the dodgy side.
Well, that's the
so
other
then that
there's a financial incentive to pollute the water now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Because nobody cares where the money comes from.
But this is the thing though, which is you then have the free market extremists, whatever, and then they would then say, well, you would then, if that situation is discovered, then people would then take that into their own hands because that pisses them off, and then they create incentive structures. So then they start paying people to make sure the water supplies don't get polluted, and you have that balance. So people are now using their money to, just manage incentive any way they want. And this is also charity. Like the argument against government-run welfare is charity. That's what the libertarians propose. And these are all ways of accomplishing social things, but still using money and actually, identifying money as a way of achieving, or not even achieving, but flowing through these social institutions effectively.
I think it's too easy.
True.
I think it's too easy to
problem. It's just fudgy. It's too fudgy. We don't have money is not very fudgy. It's why it's so useful. Again, bringing up the chickens versus the goat. It's a lot more useful in a purely utilitarian sense to be able to know the exact cost of each chicken and the cost of the goats and allow it to still play out its dynamics within the market, but you do know what you're dealing with, right? And the only argument I'm really presenting here is that there's too much fudginess in this other value system that is extraordinarily important to people.
Right.
And this fudginess is actually it's overly open to manipulation.
I'm still not sure what you mean by this fudginess being problematic, because again, water is going to be valuable at different prices. Like people will be willing to pay for a bottle of water different amounts of money. And then especially like when you then move to Asia, right? Then, suddenly food is now 30 cents instead of $10, right? And it's mind opening, and just everyday goods, you start to realize, wow, the exact same thing over here. Some things are more pricey and some things are beyond cheap.
Yeah, but you can tell when
to
it
the
changes.
Western input, and
know that it's
but then if you were to
different
price it the
from
same,
one place to another. That's an extreme utility.
Yeah, but that seems good though, because the thing is that you can then subsidize the cost in the third world, like maybe they're earning pittance on the profits there with the amount of profits you get from the first world. So, and as well, like a website design, like you could sell website design at cost based on your arbitrary definition of time, how much you're willing to take for that. Or you can sell the same website design to someone who really needs a website and they'll pay 10 times as much. So like this seems like a feature rather than a bug, and I don't know why this is.
I'm not arguing that it's not a feature.
Yeah.
I'm saying that we need to expand that feature to other areas of human life.
Right. Ben, I think you keep on like bringing up the elements where capitalism works quite well in regards to like material resources. Yep. What I think Nick and what Andrew Yang brings up is there are elements to our human lives that we consider extremely important that are not the production of certain material resources. So the example he uses is his wife who's at home taking care of their son. Like her market value is zero for the child that she's producing and taking care of. For that will be a great benefit to future society, but one that is such a high investment or long-term investment to go through that. The market is more short-term focused. And so for those types of situations that we where there's no real material resource to be gained from the interaction, that is where some other incentivization needs to be put into place so that these things aren't just left out in the cold so that they no longer occur, because they're still crucial to the foundation of society, but they're not. They don't produce a resource that can be exploited through a capitalistic system.
There's that famous quote, and I cannot remember what it is, but it is something like that which is measured grows, or something like, if we count it, then it will grow, but if we're not, in a sense, if we're not paying attention,
I see,
it's not going to expand in the same manner. And that's something that we are counting and paying attention to is
right.
So I'm saying we need to count more.
That's what Yang brings up.
Right, but
like the GDP
we already
as a growth measurement tool is like a horrible measurement tool to use. Like, all it is telling us is about our market viability, and like there's much more to the stability to a society rather than just the market viability. There's the people that compose that market and interact with that market. Whereas if some other social or spiritual resources are not being met within that society, then the market, the GDP would still plummet due to their uninvolvement with it.
Right.
But you wouldn't be able to tell that just by looking at the GDP. You would have to have some other metric to measure off of.
Yeah. Well, those things can be different measurements, but I think considering those other measurements, currencies, is then making it interoperable with money, and then you're just running into the exact same issue. Because, for someone who's going to earn, this token for being friends with people, then that token will eventually become fungible with dollars.
I don't think
and it's the same thing with like food tokens. Like, you give food tokens out for welfare, and then people just sell the food tokens. Now that's something
okay.
which, like,
that's a good thing. That's a good quality.
But then why not just use money then instead of food tokens?
Because you're still rewarding on a different metric. You want translation between different value systems. This gets back into our cults having permeable boundaries. You want cults to trade with each other, but you also need to make sure you know what your value system is, basically. But I don't view it as a bad thing. That's why, again, I'm looking for answers that synthesize with capitalism, not offer a counter to it.
Right.
Well, you don't want a bad actor
would you
to
then
step in with a large purse and suddenly take over.
But this is one of these things which kind of come with ICOs, which is if you come up with a different token, let's just call it the social token, right? And then people can swap that out for USD. Then how much should they swap it out for USD? And then you still pricing the token by the base currency, which will be USD, or maybe in the future that will be Libri coin. So you're still weighing whenever you're kind of doing these measurements. Like, these measurements could be like the Gini index. You don't want to measure the Gini index in USD. You don't want to measure reciprocity, or you don't want to measure trust or honor in USD, because otherwise you just equated them and made them equivalent to USD, in which case that's problematic, because then you do actually really have prostitution. And I think the maybe an alternative solution, like I think I understand the problem, but I think one of the alternative solutions here is just to devalue this endless need for production, or this endless need for consumerism, or this endless need for jobs. Like, in Australia, they're just so jobs focused. They will knock down buildings to then make jobs. It's like the broken window economics. And in Australia, you could just completely rest on your laurels. But the issue with resting on your laurels is then China or some other ultra capitalistic company, they continue to improve their technology, and then they can evade and then wipe you out. So there's like this need to kind of keep up with the Joneses, because otherwise the Joneses could kill you, or invade you, or take you over. So that's one of the big complexities here. But I think we can totally devalue USD. And just give me one more minute, and then I need to pop off and head off. So I was talking with Pleasure of a Doubt a few days ago, and we're talking about homelessness. So I've been homeless before, and I've also lived like a year without money to kind of challenge my assumptions about money. And it's kind of interesting because living without money, you start to realize, oh, what is money? And you realize it's like a trade of things. So I could either get like a water bottle from the garbage can and then use that and clean it out, but that takes like an hour, or, you know, I can dumpster dive to get my things, but that takes so much time. Instead, I could work, add value to somebody, and then I have this token that I can then exchange very quickly for a water bottle for 60 cents, right? And, you know, that saves a lot of time, but there is like food differences. But he said, which was interesting, so I posed that it's really not that scary to be homeless. Like this fear that Americans have of losing all the money isn't actually that scary. Like you can make it by, and hitchhiking is great, and, you know, you can sleep in parks. Like it's really actually quite nice. To some extent, once you sort out hygiene and shelter and food, once you got those down, it's just like any other type of traveling. But he said, well, the issue is if you have children, then you really care about protecting your shit, right? Yeah. And I think this is, that's one of the things, because if you have children, you want money to secure your children's future. Or you have a community like the Amish do. And it's interesting because if you were to introduce money to the Amish, they're going to reject it because they know that devil kind of thing, right? And, you know, any type of token would be that type of system. So they have these implicit measurements, right? Trust, community, loyalty, that are working well. And I think trying to tokenize those introduces money, and then it introduces problems.
Well, for the Amish community, it's much easier because they're such a small, tightly knit community. Whereas when we're interacting on such a nationwide scale here, then because we don't have these tightly knit, not isolation, well, I guess somewhat isolationist communities all by themselves, that are reliant upon each other and self-sustaining. That's the term I was meaning, not isolationist. Because we don't have that, because we're such a nationwide network that we have to interact with individuals that we do not know. There has to be some sort of, I guess, metric to judge. To judge.
Well, would you say that counting itself is, in a sense, evil, corruptive? Because when you said the Amish, for example, what came to my mind is that they would reward whatever their token was on a different metric than production. They would reward it on these value systems that they have in place that they're functioning with subconsciously or partial.
Well, it's also interesting because you also have the idea of like loving unconditionally, or even in die empty. It's just like contribute. Like if you're working where you're expecting reward, then you're working by your ego, and your ego can feel threatened. If you just contribute the greatest work, then eventually you'll get the benefit back, which is kind of like the love everyone, you know, Jesus loves you type mentality. And maybe that's better, because if you're not playing this what is it? Quid pro quo, is that the phrase?
Quid pro quo.
Quid pro quo.
Yeah, that's it, right? Yeah, type game. Then maybe that's a completely different strategy. And you have that in the moneyless communities. You have these ones where, you know, it's just this giving type thing without the expectation of receiving. Because as soon as you tokenize, you also then you're measuring for the purpose of how much am I receiving, how much am I exchanging in this trade. You're introducing trade mechanics. And with that, I got to go. It was
interesting.
It was, yeah. You guys, please keep talking. It's great to actually meet you, Nick. Thanks so much for the call. Very interesting. I got to bounce. Cheers.
Cool. Thanks, Ben.
Cheerio.
Cheerio.
Yeah, at least in the book, Andrew Yang presented his social credit system, and I don't think it had a way that the credit system could be interchangeable with just the
tangible goods.
Yeah, or with currency. Like the way he explained it was something like, okay, you're in a bad situation here. The government gives you 1,000 credit points that you can put up onto the market for like, hey, I need my fence fixed. I put up 100 points to whoever can fix my fence. Then somebody comes by, fixes the fence and gets those 100 credits. And then once they have those credit points, they can like do something similar for their own thing. Like, can somebody mow my lawn here or something like that? Just so that trying to.
Why isn't the current system in place good enough for that?
Huh?
So
Why isn't the current system in place?
I actually want to paint a little picture that might help the discussion, which is these movements in our means of valuing things have already happened before. So, right, you can look at most human history as being locked in the I might have brought this up before, but in the tangible production system. And when we were operating primarily in the tangible world, our money reflected that. So regardless of, gold is the most familiar. We were all trading with gold, but it was also that way even with like native tribes or whatever, where they'd go and collect a certain shell and then trade with this certain very pretty or rare shell.
Right. So I think I know where you're going with this. Like now in our current system where information is the most valuable resource we can
intangible production.
Right. So is that where
that's where fiat currency suddenly popped into existence, where it never existed before. And fiat currency, I would argue, was a necessary change to our currency system to reflect the pace that the world was now moving value around.
Okay, this is actually a thought that I had earlier today that I want to bring this in, and I think mix a couple of things that we already talked about a little bit about earlier, where I see money as this, I guess, indication of the authority's competency. Where, okay, so say you have like a king or a Caesar or a president or something like that, and they have their currency in place for within their country, where anybody within their country can use that currency to exchange goods with each other. But if, say, the government is looking like it's on the brink of collapse, that currency suddenly drops greatly in value to the point where it's no longer really capable of buying the same things that it was able to do before. Because
only in fiat currency. That's a quality of fiat currency. When we were trading gold, you could take a gold coin with Caesar's face on it and go anywhere else that also used gold, and it was worth the same all across the board.
Okay. So then I guess the fiat currency holds a sort of social indicator within it.
I wouldn't say social, I would say intangible. And the reason, so I have 3 layers that I'm functioning with here. I went through 2: tangible, intangible, and then untangible. And it is primarily the third that we are moving into. So that's what social media is reflecting, is not intangible. Intangible is the quality of your ideas, right? Calculus is worth more than algebra or whatever. It's
or right on the circumstance.
Okay, so then
it does.
Is untangible like taboos that you can't talk about?
No, I would say untangible is just a part of human life that we have not had the luxury of being able to count. So in the same way that in the tangible age, we had no way to value the great thinkers. Pythagoras was not a rich man, but he was primarily concerned with intangible production. But in a tangible world, that intangible production had no way to backwards translate into value in the society until way later. Right? Later, it became architects making better buildings and etc.
Right. So what's an example of an untangible thing?
So what I'm counting as the untangible are things like love, friendship, relationship, honesty, authenticity. these qualities that we see starting to come to the forefront through a system like social media, right?
And is there an element to this where the untangible things, like we have a great apprehension in trying to convert into tangible things? Like,
I would say that is a worthy apprehension.
Like to try to systematize love into some sort of tangible process, or an intangible, like, oh, it's just a...
Well, it would probably go into intangible and then to untangible. Right. And there are meeting grounds between these that we need to focus on. For example, art is the meeting ground between all of these systems, in a sense, right? You're communicating great ideas, you're communicating depthful feelings, and sometimes you're also producing a tangible object when you produce art.
So we're talking about two forces, I think, in the modes of creativity, which are convergence and divergence. And it's very hemispherical, by the way. But one hemisphere prefers convergence and the other prefers divergence. And what you're describing as the untangible is something like the divergence side of things. It's when you have a lot of overlapping value that's kind of ambiguous. It's undistinguishable. You can't quite get a grasp of it yet. And on the other hemisphere, you have this much more hemispherically dominant mode of convergence, of no, this is how we chop it up into orderly bits and give it this value. So that's kind of like the process of sticking a painting up for auction, right? It's like trying to transform whatever intangible social value the painting had at one point, hanging in a gallery or somebody's home, or whatever the reputation of the artist happens to be. Like, ooh, Van Gogh's value changed greatly over time, right? But the process of evaluating that in terms of chopping up in a strict form that you can count with money, countable, right?
Yeah.
Numerable is the word. It's a fascinating, weird process that we have to go through in order to start having a grammar, a lexicon, a language to use when discussing value.
Yes.
Yeah.
All right. So what you were saying then, Nick, was that, I don't know if I'm getting ahead of you, but were you saying that, like, you suspect that our monetary system will be moving towards an untangible system?
Yes. And it already is, right? Because all of our attempts so far are really shitty. Because Facebook has monetized the untangible, but it does it through manipulative ads. Right. That's its system. And the reason that system is the one it uses is because we're still focused in this previous value system. So the only way it knows how to translate human attention is through selling us ads. Right? That's its mechanism for moving from these realms, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
All I'm saying is that we should make the relationship direct.
All right,
and Patreon, for example, is a move towards making it more direct. And then you can... I'm saying we should play in this realm. I'm not saying there's like, here's the answer, you know, but...
All right. So is there a greater capacity to produce sustainable resources like food, water, shelter, things like that through the system of the untangible? So
yes, because it increases social cohesion and group structures. So it also solves some of the problems that the intangible age has no way of dealing with. For example, how do you clean the oceans when no one owns the oceans and it requires the synchronous effort of many countries?
I see.
There's no answer to do that within a capitalist, as we currently recognize it, a capitalist system.
Or
you have some
in a capitalist.
I'm bending the words a little here, but hopefully you get what I'm trying to say.
Like, it's not incentivized through a capitalist system, for sure.
Yes.
And then because there will be other things that are maybe more incentivized, it will just be fruitless.
It'll be eaten. It'll have its feet eaten away faster than it can build up.
Okay. So social cohesion being one aspect of the untangible. And so, like, would monetary value be, or like currency, would that possibly be able to be, well, I guess through like an Amish community, if they don't have currency, they're entirely using an untangible system for group interaction with each other.
Yeah.
So when you say
we're all
untangible,
using untangible systems.
it's the internal system. It's our neurochemistry. Yeah. So when you're dealing with something that you can't touch, it's almost certainly then something you're representing in here. That's it.
Well, and the differentiation between intangible and untangible, I think, is useful because we're familiar with dealing with things we can't touch and knowing they have a value. The example of making a website that was brought up earlier. That's not a tangible product.
Yes. But prior to having a word for something, the reaching and grasping before you know what it is. I get it. Yeah. It's useful.
And you were saying like a current, like a system of currency, like fiat currency, is an intangible product because it's simply a symbol of the.
It's rooted to nothing.
Well, it's rooted in.
It's rooted in a lot of things, but it's not rooted in a tangible object.
Yeah, my bank account's all digits.
Yeah,
there's not a physical thing to it.
There's nothing backing it up. There's no. You know, that's why fiat economic systems are so open to catastrophic failure, is because there's nothing underneath it. It's based on, in a sense, the belief in it as a symbol.
Well, it's a stack. It's a technology stack that's entirely reliant upon electricity. Sorry, John. Go ahead.
And so then I guess
that's an interesting point.
Yeah. Untangible products, or I don't even know, like untangible realities, are more anti-fragile because even if you remove all resources from them, they still have the capacity to produce resources from that. So like if say you have a friend system, a social friend system, and then you lose your job, if you have a strong enough untangible
network, you're okay.
Yeah, then you're okay.
Same with intangible, going back to tangible, right? Having calculus but not having a building, that's a good situation to be in because with the calculus you can figure out a building. You know, like there is an aspect of backwards translation. Now it doesn't do that forever, right? You need it's like two opposing hierarchies and you need both of them to form the whole structure.
I like this a lot. Like this is Nick's hierarchy of needs or something like
that. But yeah, this is again why is LARPing suddenly becoming such a thing? Why is these cultic structures suddenly moving so far up in salience? I think it's telling us, in a sense, that we're looking towards the untangible and don't know what to do with it. You know, and it does have a superseding effect over, say, the intangible, which had a certain vetting process that now is no longer nearly as powerful.
Yeah, I guess like there's a way that you can tell that it's hierarchically superior to the intangible just because people are giving up their intangible goods in order to hold on to the untangible.
Well, unless they're rich in them, because there's lots of people that are extraordinarily rich in untangibles and extraordinarily poor in tangibles. That's why it's good to have trade. You want rich people that are wealthy in tangible goods but have no soul, have no love in their life. You want them to be able to give their tangible goods to people that have a lot of soul. You know, you want that translation to happen because it helps both parties.
All right. And so within our current system, that's not happening because
or it's highly distorted. Right now, I would say tangibly rich people can buy distorted gross forms of untangibles for pennies on the dollar.
It's funny because on Twitter, oh gosh, I can't remember the guy's name, but there's some, I guess, billionaire that is like doing these stupid raffles and giving people that give some sort of story for why they need the money, like $1,000 or something like that.
Yeah, buying the story. Yeah.
Bill Pulte, I think is his name. Bill Pulte. Okay, William J. Pulte. Yeah. So that's like like at least one, like maybe like.
I mean, watch the Titanic. You know, like the whole story of the Titanic is playing on that dynamic. A lot of our stories play on that dynamic.
Oh, okay, you're gonna have to explain that one to me. How's the
just the lifeless rich girl finds the poor, full of life man.
And gives up her
right
in order to live with him. Yeah,
the Prince and the Pauper.
Yes, yeah, exactly. It's a common theme. It goes back a long way. I'm just saying it would be useful if we could represent that trade in a way where we knew what the trade was instead of just
and
guessing.
Also, especially since we're living on such a a national scope here, where these smaller practice systems will need to be modified in order to work on this broader scale. Otherwise, otherwise people will need to leave the national scale, which might be for the better, and enter into their isolationist communities that don't rely upon the broader community. But of course, those
again, you want permeable boundaries, ideally, you know. And that's why I kind of think of it almost like it would be great if there was just like an economic battle of cult dollars. You know, like let everyone make their own currency and let them battle it out. And then, you are simultaneously, through an economic competition, you're simultaneously synthesizing a culture.
We do have that. That's
might not play out that way. Could go towards hell and be terrible.
Yeah, that's the financial exchange market. The actual value of each currency is pitted against each other and traded against each other in their own separate market.
But that's on a national scale. Like he's talking like with like even smaller than that, like each of the smaller communities within. And I guess that sort of happens on the stock exchange where a company's stocks, like there's already this in place for companies, but that's the thing, like insofar as like we are not simply career people, like or jobs people, we have lives other than that. Like if we can have the competition at play for the more enriching parts of our lives, that way
the competition's already at play. It's just counted with thumbs ups and thumbs down buttons. You know, and that's not a good system because it doesn't boost the behaviors that it should be boosting. Because we refuse to actually count it in a way that is meaningful, it instead distorts around our ideas of tangible value. Again, so what ends up happening is the person who draws the most attention is who is highest valued, which there's aspects of that, certainly, but there's a lot of fudge room in there to not be a loving or, you know, whatever, to be a shitty person and still put on a show for everyone.
Yeah. Then you get those areas of counterculture people watching them just to get angry and things like that, or sharing because things are angry. That's something we've talked about before with Tyler. Like one of his good critiques against Twitter is that in aggravating material gets upregulated to the top.
Highly salient. Yeah. And properly for our survival mechanisms, you know, like there's a good reason that that's the way it is.
Yeah, that's the thing though. It's a misapplication.
Again, cults are salience manipulation tools. So like, you know.
Okay, so that's an interesting way.
So for every oh wait, hold on, John. Listen, for every hyper. Okay, all right, do it.
Okay, so that at least helps me understand what you were talking about, salience manipulations, where like we might have had these adaptive mechanisms for, say, the savannah or something like that, and then those same mechanisms are being applied to an environment that is not equivalent to that past environment, and might not even be adapted to the current environment that we're in, or it's adapted.
Almost certainly is not. Adaptive anymore. You know, the savannah most of the behaviors, many of them at least, are no longer adaptive in a city setting. Some of them are. You still have to watch out for the cars, and you know, when the guy cuts you off, you're gonna whatever, etc. But
right. All right, go ahead, Tyler.
Yeah, well, it is adaptive. It's just narrowly adaptive. The question is how broadly does your game extend, and how often, how long can you play it in the future?
Yeah,
and that's the thing. Like the element of cults is like they are utilizing these previously adaptive behaviors that are invigorating and salient to the individuals, but they're using it in such a way that they, I guess, boost the power of the cult itself in some way. So they're, I guess, I don't know. There's an element where you can,
well,
like,
look at a religion. You know.
Yeah, that's the thing. Like with anything, you can kind of interpret it in a negative light or in a positive light. So it's hard with these abstractions. It kind of gets too hard to, I guess, pin down anything specific.
That's why I always try and say when I present this, I also try and say like, or it could be hellish, you know, like it can go either way. It's just there's a potential here, and it would be good if people were trying to make the potential, you know, they were directing it towards something that they wanted it to be rather than
all right,
defaulting towards the shitty direction it seems to be going.
All right, so this actually brings up an interesting question I wanted to bring up here is a religion simply a cult that has lasted a longer time?
You're probably asking the wrong person. I consider everything a cult. So yeah, religions are also
all right. So
but particularly they take on classically cultic structures. Absolutely.
Yeah.
You know, they generally obsess around an individual or a very small group of individuals that are elevated to extraordinarily high status. You know, there's a lot of
an exemplar.
Yeah. And I would also say like this has been going on forever, whether it was a formal religion or not. You know, it could have been the famous tribe leader you had that people still tell stories about, or, you know, whatever. There's always examples of human behavior that we consider exceptional and we use as a model for our own behavior.
Right. And then through that emulation of that noble individual,
forms a cultic structure around it.
Right.
Now, that doesn't mean we're throwing out pragmatism. So then, again, all it's doing is shifting the question. You know, it's a reorientation more so than I'm not trying to like level the playing field.
All right, and
I think it may have to do with the dominance of the character, perhaps. So, for instance, in what was the Philippines, Duarte, whatever his name is, his dominant theme is killing all the druggies, he calls them, right? All the guys addicted to heroin. That's what he's famous for right now. Murdering sprees to clean the streets of all of his poor. So that's like that's the salience of the dictator. And so anyone there that resonates with that, that's the level on which they would resonate with that cultic leader. But you can have this wide variety of leaders that demonstrate an extraordinarily broad range of behaviors, not just limited to something like, you know, murderous intent. It could be something more like a full example of how to live a life.
Yeah,
I think those, in fact, tend to be the much more effective.
They last thousands of years.
Right. Or,
you know, like they literally last that long.
Or forever.
Or forever.
Or these eternal archetypes. Right?
Well, and that, yeah, exactly. And you get into the archetypal stuff, and you can composite it. Even if you didn't have the figure and his life, you can still take the bits and pieces of a million people's lives and composite something similar to the exemplar.
Right.
You know.
And still,
which is probably what's happening.
How do you do that? I want to know.
Well, again, it's largely subconscious, but
yeah, it is.
these cultural archetypal figures form, seemingly regardless of whether it's placed on Zeus is a rough example, but
have you seen those pictures where they take like, countless of thousand pictures of people and overlay them with a transparency, so you get an averaged
face? I feel like I have seen that. It's been a while though.
Some of their
and they do it by like regions and stuff, right?
I guess you can do it in whatever.
I guess you could do it however
you want. It makes sense to me because like when I write, the characters that I write are aggregates of people that I see online or read from or interact with as a human. So like every character is an amalgamation of multiple people or multiple other characters as well. I don't think you can help but do it.
Yeah, that's the ego, right? The ego is the thing that thinks it's the only thing in there.
Yeah.
And then it's just
with its 10 million voices.
Yeah, it's so horribly mistaken. So horribly mistaken. But that's the thing. That's the thing. Like, we've managed to pilot this weird collaboration of internal desires underneath the seemingly egoistic unity of I, right?
Yeah, well, and a lot of the judgment starts again is are you consonant or dissonant?
Mm-hmm.
Are those voices warring with each other, or are they all working together?
Yeah.
And that's almost our measure of what's making a robust character, or a robust.
Oh, cut out.
Yep. And yet, strangely enough, we are not purely mimetic creatures, right? Because even though we are presented with the abusive behaviors of our parents, let's say, we can choose to try to fight that pattern. Even though there are economically depressive scenarios, there are the random few individuals. I don't want to say random. There are the few individuals that somehow manage to climb their way out of the circumstances that seem to condemn so many others.
Right. Shoot, there was something I was gonna. Oh, right. Well, here's an idea that I had regarding, I guess, the problem of pragmatism, where like no matter, like you're just imposing your own idea and then just testing it based off that idea. Like if you put forward a couple of different ideas and then pragmatically measure all of those ideas together, does that kind of step outside of at least the vulnerabilities from a singular pragmatic conception? So like say you have the idea of, okay, I want a stable society with social cohesion. I want a relatively happy life. I want to have children. I want to be able to feel like I'm growth and in the zone. I'm having a meaningful relationship with my career. I can provide for my family, things like that. That's like 5 different metrics for pragmatism to work off of. And I don't know, having a almost like 5 different senses that you can use to at least get a better idea to the utility to a worldview or a framework or a system of rituals and cult or cultish behavior.
Yeah, good cult's got to get all that stuff. It's got to hit all the right bases, right?
Right.
Yeah.
All the right bases.
Yeah, that's again consonance through the layers is really, it's how you're judging. And I brought this up before too, but it really starts to become, truth starts to take on a appearance of internal consistency much more so than external consistency. And so in a sense you could call science is great pitfall at the moment, at least, the dissonance born between the subjective and the objective frames that it's created, which makes it there's a heavy dissonance underlying its entire framework. If it could solve that,
do you think science wants to take responsibility for that?
I don't think anyone does.
Poor science, man.
No. Oh, and that's a good point.
No, I agree with you. I agree with you.
It's not its point. We should have subjective systems that are functioning in the background, but science is also trying to eat the subjective frame, and so it makes it its responsibility.
It's just trying to measure it way too much. That's all. There are certain people, I think, that inhabit scientific frameworks that get kind of rabid about their insistence that everyone measure the world the same way they do. But ultimately, it just seems to be this weird kind of fixation on measurement. I picture a very old gray man sitting over a desk, like an architect or something at a workstation, measuring things like an old German dude. That's my sense of that.
Yeah, there's something
like let the right or left brainers be left brainers. Yes. That's great. It's extraordinarily useful, but they don't get to say that's more valuable than the right.
Yeah, it's useful insofar it's useful insofar as we can have the left brainers and the right brainers interact on something. If the left brainers are all, building atomic bombs.
Yeah.
Different things like that. And the right brainers are all, I don't know, writing poetry.
That's true.
Have a problem going on.
Well, you need the mutual trade between them, the recognition of each's value.
Right.
It's fun to write poetry. It's not fun to write poetry when you have a stick and the dirt.
Right.
You need the pen and paper at least.
You cannot avoid the ego. It's like it just gets built up using any kind of systematizing, because the convergent answer is always egoistic. It truly is the only thing the left hemispherical mindset can achieve. It's the only truth it can realize, which is this is the one and only answer, whatever it happens to come to. That's the certainty of the one answer. It's like when you're doing math. That's why math is so preferred by the left hemisphere. It's one answer. Whoa, that's it, baby.
Yeah,
one answer. Woo, love it.
So cogito ergo sum is a left hemisphere truth.
Yes, absolutely. Well, that is what he was searching for.
Right.
He was searching as a reductionistic seeking for the one and only thing that he couldn't doubt. Right.
Let's abstract the pure aspect of the person out of the
and look
out of the system that sustains it.
Yeah, look how many left hemispherically dominant people are always searching for like the grand theory of everything. Right? Anything just like one. Look at what's that one guy? Carroll.
Sean.
Yeah, Sean. Yeah. Okay. He loves to like put up a few of the equations. Like these are the only equations you need to describe it. I think Michio Kaku does this every now and then. These guys are ridiculous. Those are the only equations you need to describe the universe. Come on, get real. Did we both go to college? I dropped out, but come on, man.
I made it 3 weeks.
Well, I kind of got kicked out, but I went back afterwards. I just to quit again, so I can let them know what I thought of.
I joined a cult instead of going back to college. Those were the two options.
College you need.
What a world we live in.
Surprisingly enough, it was less cultic over there.
Yeah, right.
Well, so I think there's this really interesting phenomenon that we can observe in nature that allows us to avoid these kinds of behaviors, actually. And it has a lot to do with the structure of money, as we were talking before, the form of it, let's say. It also has to do with the underlying idea of the Ouroboros consuming itself, right? Or a cannibal even, let's say, which is kind of a similar concept, a little more evil. All right, so generally speaking, the resources that you need will be different than the waste product that you produce. So I eat corn, and no, that's not going to work. I eat cereal, right, and it produces a waste product that I can't recognize. It's not good for me. It's actually in a good healthy ecosystem. It should be the resource product of another organism, right? So the things that prefer
a dung beetle or something.
Yeah, so any kind of coprophilic thing. So that demonstrates a healthy ecosystem. But it's characteristic that the foods that I eat are not my waste. I don't just kind of reach around and turn into the Ouroboros. So what I think what that is demonstrating it that there is a characteristic to a healthy ecosystem that requires a separation between the differences in the structures of your resources and your waste products. Yeah. And that something allows, when you do that, it allows larger and larger resource niches to develop, which allows larger and larger diversity in organisms to develop, which then allows more robustness to the system. It's like an anti-fragility, something like that.
Right.
Okay.
All right. So then bringing it back then to capitalism, the waste.
Bless you, overconsume.
Yeah. Well, that's cancer. We got that.
Okay. So just within the system of capitalism, the resource to, I guess, capitalism is, I guess, workers, and the waste system is, I guess, the production of value and the production of resources, other resources, or consumer goods, something like that.
So in capitalist economy, your resource is money. It's capital. So you can think of every little storefront with its greedy little mouth open, waiting for the dollar bills to come stuffing in.
Consuming capital and producing human labor.
Or is human labor?
You could look at it that way. That's probably like how Marx.
Well, you can see the Ouroboros problem here, which is that we can't quite tell our consumption from our production, and I brought that up slightly earlier by saying we're not a consumerist culture, we're a productionist culture.
Yep.
And it's our obsession with the shit that makes us have to produce a lot or to consume a lot. Right?
Oh, okay. So like the things that we buy are things that just make us have to buy more? Is that what you meant by a productionist?
Well, we're obsessed with the production end.
Yeah.
And then the side effect of that is extraordinary consumption.
Right.
Yeah, you have so much that why save, right? They just go buy stuff. It's all this cool stuff. You see all this cool stuff? Let's go buy it. Yep.
Yeah. Let me delineate it. If we were a true consumerist society, our taste for consumer products would be extraordinarily high. We wouldn't take low quality products if we were if we were obsessed with the consumption end. We would only want to be putting the very best into us.
Well,
that's not what we see.
Some
do. Absolutely. Yeah. But when you look at the aggregate, I would say we are generally more focused on the production end than we are on the consumption end.
Right. Just because it's produced, I'm going to consume it rather than and
we derive our sense of value from what we produce, not from what we consume. Right? I feel like a valuable contributing member when I make the knives, not when I consume media.
That's true. Okay.
Right. Even though perhaps it's actually my real use is more along the lines of consuming the media, because the natural product of it is more valuable than making what is now a useless object.
Right.
Yeah, I think that may be true in a more ordinary sense, but there's definitely there are different pathological tendencies. Like someone who is inordinately focused on food, like a huge glutton, like 500, 600 pounds. Their sense of value is inordinately tied to food itself.
Certainly.
And I think this actually is kind of defined by our little untangible pathologies now, right? Like these weird associations that are being promised by Twitter, and they're being attached to these structures in our head. But they're not necessarily fulfilling the deepest of the promises that they're offering, let's say.
Yeah. Well, and it's the metaphor to food is useful, and I talked about this with Paul actually. But right, Twitter's the McDonald's of the internet.
Yeah.
You know, like, yeah, it kind of satisfies the hunger. It has so much MSG in it that it like blocks the hunger or blocks the full response. I'm not sure if MSG does that, but every time I eat something with it in it, I just can't stop eating it. It's the weirdest thing. Like Doritos, I can't stop eating them.
Interesting.
Whereas the cheesy corn chips from Trader Joe's, which are very similar, I can eat 5 and put the bag away. But
I would think
that's
it
a
would be
side
the
effect.
other way around, but I wonder now. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know how true that is, but it's true to my
I mean, it holds
experience.
true for Chinese lunch buffets. I can tell you that.
Right? Right? Just
Oh,
shuts off the I'm full feeling.
All right. So this is the, I guess, problem then, because we recognize that Twitter is the McDonald's of, I guess, social media, or what is the attempt that is trying to be made? It's the McDonald's of social interaction.
Yeah, human communication.
Right. And as of right
Relationship
now,
even.
And as of right now, we don't have a formidable replacement that is that has such a
Can I
broad
be more
scale.
derogatory?
Yes, go right
Be
ahead.
more like the McDonald's of gossip.
I would say that's
yeah. There's not a whole lot of fact checking going on there. It's more like just like high speed, high velocity insults whizzing about till they burn somebody bad enough that they throw their phone out in disgust.
but I do think that it's focused on relationship between people itself. For instance, we're doing this instead, right? And right now we're maybe at like a neighborhood diner or something. It's it's not peak quality might be like all of us in the same room in a nice setting, able to interact that way. You're getting a lot more from the yeah.
Just all meet up somewhere like in Texas or something. That would probably be the closest
in the middle.
All 3 of us. Yeah.
Uh-oh, we just offended Ben.
Oh, Ben, right.
Bloody America.
He's gonna drag us to like
Bloody America.
the middle of the Atlantic or something.
We'll just meet out
middle for him is a very strange place. Somewhere in Africa, maybe Sierra Leone.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, even though this here is a highly salient and I think at least productive conversation taking place, it could be even better than that if we all were in the same location and I don't know, actually we're producing something at the same time along with this conversation. But yeah, there's always these
you could still have the cameras, but I guess the part I am focusing on is more the consumptive aspect, which is like, if human relationship is the food we're trying to get, Twitter's bottom of the barrel, this is like a big step up, but it's still not what we get when we are hanging out with our friends and family in person. Maybe a phone call is like a little bit below where we're at right now. And then maybe like if we kept developing the technology, maybe some type of augmented reality would be a step up, and you get a transition. The other interesting thing,
there are some things to note about human to human interaction with the body itself, though.
Yeah.
There are elements to that we may even be completely unaware of.
Yeah.
Right. So, yeah,
it's a good large step up before we get to that level, potentially. Although it's weird too, because you can also enter into circumstances that are in person that are less meaningful than what we 3 are doing right now.
Yeah.
Oh, sure.
Even with the bodily interaction.
Yeah. Sure.
It
depends on which part of the body needs to be stimulated by information, I suppose.
Very true.
Yeah. So right now we're all kind of like shuffling little
Up in the
our
head.
neocortex around.
Yeah.
Whereas every now and then you need to like physically hug somebody or express grief, or you name it, like this,
or kick a ball, something.
I wish, man. Yeah, there's so many things that we love to do with our bodies. It's so fun to have a body.
It is.
I cherish the things I can still do with mine. And I know now, I think, a little closer to what it must be like to be very advanced in age and to see almost all of your capacity have drifted away slowly over the years. It's got to be weird.
I know. I did acrobatics.
I'm sorry,
for
everyone.
years.
That no existential crises.
The drop. But I recognize that very thing. I did acrobatics for years, and doing it now, my knees and back ache for weeks afterwards.
Yeah, well, it becomes an identity, right? So you lose that behavior, and you lose your sense of self. A very real part of you dies, right? It dies off as you lose it, or part of your skill dies, your memories of it die. I used to play piano.
I even think about piano. I was just gonna bring up guitar, and it's like so much of my actual enjoyment of it has nothing to do with the music at all, but actually the mechanical and tactile sensations that come from it. Which is
it's the timing of it, I think. What we love as humans is timing things together, because we're primarily correlational engines. I think is what the brain is doing. It takes disparate moments that are, it seems, somewhere between like it's somewhere just under a quarter of a second, maybe. There's this weird smear of time that we appreciate as now, but it's this smear of time that unites these disparate senses.
Right?
Yeah, it's very...
The gap between touch, sound, and sight is pretty enormous, particularly touch.
I wonder how much a conversation like this might change if like all of us were walking while talking, like on our phones, and
oh man, I love the walking
out in the wild, like just talking over. Because I don't know, I find that when I'm walking, I feel I have much more clarity over my thoughts and like getting better thoughts while I'm thinking. That
you're not like stuck in the stagnant bowl of your head.
Right.
I actually noticed that's a prominent one on psychedelics.
Yeah.
Need to walk, or else I just start going crazy.
Yeah. Well, it activates that exploratory sense of the brain for sure, right?
Oh yeah.
I guess it depends on the psychedelic, I suppose, but most of the broad spectrum stuff, like your generic, like LSD, certainly tryptamines, like mushroom. Yeah, locomotion, right? Get the exploratory module going.
And the timing of things helps tremendous. It gives you a rhythm.
Well, that's what I mean. Like our whole brain is focused on that aspect. We put everything that's coming in through this tiny little pipe in the middle, which is our subjective, like, pinprick of a center, whatever this thing is that seems like it's right in the middle between the eyes and behind it somewhere. It's all that stuff getting focused into the middle in that one little spot, and we're timing it. And we love to figure out different timings of things. Music's all about that. Yeah, counting's all about that, and getting them all to activate together. And if you have a sound wave that somehow passes through like the long nerve in your leg at the same time that you're hearing it in your ear, that's phenomenal. It's so phenomenal that most people start moving their body when it happens. They start dancing. They don't even know how to
the signals, the thing you were talking about, the motion through the whole brain expands all the way out into the body.
It's amazing.
It's interesting. It's all the same network, of course. Just a big, weird-looking tree.
Music is really powerful. It is it's a very weird-looking tree. Exactly. That's exactly how I see it. I see it as a little brain plant that popped up out of the ground and grew legs, like a little long, and it's just kind of crawling around. That's exactly how I see it. I have a drawing on my whiteboard back here. I never erased. It reminded at one moment I had this picture of it. I can't let it go. It's exactly how I see everybody now. Little brain plants that are walking around with these stubby little legs. They're not apes at all. I prefer to go way back, right? Why stop? Go all the way back.
Yeah. All right, this has been really cool. Going through and talking about all this stuff. Surprisingly, I think we actually covered more ground in this one than the previous one, which I had thought like was. I don't know. I'll definitely re-listen to this because we went over a lot of cool stuff here. And there's something about talking with you guys. It helps me to try to get my thoughts through, but also really great like getting your guys' stuff as well.
Good for you for sticking up for yourself. Yeah,
that's the thing. After 2 years now talking with you guys, you have to kind of put yourself out there more just to get idea while I'm still here.
Well, I don't really have a good real-time monitor of that amount of talking, I suppose. So I rely on other people to kind of push back on it.
Yeah, and it works well too because like we can kind of see where you're losing steam or where I'm losing steam, and you guys jump in with the it's kind of like keeping the highest amount of energy going at the same time. It's really great having like 3 types of people that are all pretty well skilled at doing that.
Well, and I have to say, for an online call with 3 to 4 people, like it worked really well. Normally a 4-person group is like through this medium is just like hopeless. It's hard to get the right synergy of everyone working together in the conversation.
Yeah.
So
and that's the thing too, like Ben and Tyler and we've had quite a bit of practice since we first started doing like Jordan Peterson lectures and having a call every week for the last 2 years, maybe a year and a half. Wow. And so we have
awesome.
Quite a lot of practice. So yeah, we're part of the okay, let me see if I can stop. We now have a Discord channel, which I guess I can share in the description so that you guys can join in. We have quite a few different conversations going on and chats in there. We also have a discuss.bevry.me, which is our forum page so that people can join in on the conversations there. And so on Discord, that'll have the links to the conversations that were taking place. Anybody can join. That's the thing. These next couple weeks, we're going to be discussing John Vervaeke's 7th lecture now. And then the week after that, I think we're going to go over the book, The War of Art, and then back to Vervaeke lectures. So, I don't know. Nick or Tyler, do you guys have anything you want to raise awareness of?
Okay, the greatest cultic game is encapsulated nicely in the 1990s film Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure. Be excellent to each other.
Most excellent.
Be excellent to each other.
So great. Yeah. Very good. Thank you, Tyler.
Oh, man.
All right, Nick, you got anything?
I don't have anything. I think I've said my fair share.
In the description below, we have Nick's appearances on Paul Vanderklay's channels. You're like a recurring guest on his channel now.
I'm apparently the most recurring guest, so I'm trying to take a break for a while and let someone else take that spot.
All right, that's good. Get somebody get some fresh blood in there.
Yeah, exactly.
That way, when it fails, everybody will ask for you to come clamoring back for them. All right, thanks everybody for watching. Check out those links below if you want to participate. Be most excellent to each other.